The camera glides over an expanse of pine-studded hills just west of the Rockies, where neat rows of post-war homes sit like well-behaved children at attention. It is the early 1950s, an era of optimism. Men in pressed shirts mow perfect lawns. Women hang laundry that snaps like flags of domestic victory. In this bright Colorado neighborhood, the American dream seems intact, unassailable. At the end of one sleepy cul-de-sac stands a broad brown brick house with a porch swing that creaks in the dry breeze. By every outward measure, it is ordinary. 2 stories, symmetrical windows, a trimmed hedge wrapping the yard like a polite smile. The neighbors know the family who lives here is devout, industrious, friendly. The father is a veteran-turned-government worker, the mother a tireless homemaker. 12 children, yes, 12, spill from the doorway like stair-stepped echoes of their parents. Sunday mornings, the brood marches to church in pressed collars and patent leather shoes. People wave, people envy. No one imagines that behind those walls, the air sometimes vibrates with whispers and sudden, unexplainable silences. No one senses that this house will become a landmark in the study of madness, its address whispered in research labs decades later. For now, it is simply another post-war household, lively, noisy, brimming with potential. Inside, the scent of supper, roast beef, potatoes slick with butter, mingles with chalk dust from a day's worth of schoolwork. Children jostle for seats at the long pine table. The oldest boys trade harmless taunts. The youngest clutch dolls or toy cars. Their mother's eyes sweep the room, counting heads as always. 1, 2, 3, 12. Her smile is quick, practiced, a shield against the fatigue that lives in her bones. The father presides at the table's head, voice calm, precise. He speaks of discipline and duty, of the privilege of a large family in a great country. His words are firm but never cruel. Still, an undercurrent hums beneath the chatter. A sudden, too long pause when a plate slips from a child's hand. A flicker of something unreadable in the mother's gaze as the eldest boy, only a teenager, murmurs to himself while buttering bread. At night, the house exhales. Doors close. The furnace ticks like a metronome. Somewhere upstairs, one of the older sons lies awake, eyes wide, convinced the shadows on the ceiling are alive. He will not speak of it in the morning. He will not have the words. The following weeks bring subtle shifts that only a mother could notice. An eldest child forgets where he placed his books, then forgets entire conversations. Another retreats to the basement, muttering prayers no one taught him. The father, proud and pragmatic, dismisses it as growing pains, perhaps the strain of so many siblings competing for space. Boys will be boys, he says. They'll settle. But something deep in the walls is stirring, something carried in blood, in code, in the hidden mathematics of DNA. The family can neither see nor name it, yet it moves quietly through their lineage, patient and relentless. Outside, the neighborhood hums with barbecues and block parties. From the sidewalk, the house still radiates normalcy. Neighbors sip iced tea and wave as children chase fireflies. No one knows that inside. Tiny fractures are spreading through the family's foundation. Hairline cracks invisible until they suddenly gape. Years from now, scientists will study this household as if it were a living laboratory. They will map its genome, trace the inheritance of a disease that steals reality itself. But in this moment, the story is still tender, unformed. A mother smooths a blanket over her restless child. A father locks the door against a night he cannot control. The house settles into silence, and the camera pulls back, up and away, until the cul-de-sac is a neat geometry of light. The world sleeps. The storm waits. The winter of 1954 presses against the Colorado foothills like a held breath. Snow piles in soft ridges along the cul-de-sac, muffling the usual neighborhood clatter. Inside the brown brick house, however, silence no longer feels gentle. It feels watchful. It begins with sounds no one can quite locate. Late at night, the mother wakes to a low murmur, as though someone is speaking from behind the plaster. At first she blames the furnace, but when she steps into the hallway, the voices stop. Only the faint hum of the electrical wires remains, like a secret too shy to confess. Her eldest son, Donald, is the first to draw attention. He spends hours in the attic, scribbling symbols on scraps of paper. When questioned, he insists he is recording instructions, though he cannot explain from whom. His handwriting loops and dives as if pulled by invisible tides. At dinner, he chews each bite exactly 13 times, staring at the ceiling between mouthfuls. His younger brothers exchange glances but say nothing. A week later, the second oldest, Matthew, develops a fascination with locks. He tests every door in the house, turning knobs again and again, a private ritual that leaves tiny crescents of rust on his fingertips. One night, the mother finds him crouched beside the front door, whispering to the deadbolt, as if bargaining with it. He startles when she calls his name and offers no explanation. The parents respond with practical remedies, more chores, stricter bedtimes, the suggestion that the boys need fresh air and exercise. Their father, trained to believe that discipline can correct any flaw, refuses to indulge what he calls nonsense. Yet when he steps into the hallway after midnight and hears faint giggles leaking from the attic, his throat tightens. He tells no one. Soon the disturbances multiply. Dishes vanish and reappear in impossible places. The youngest girl wakes screaming that someone is breathing beside her bed. Doors that were locked at night stand open in the morning, their hinges silent. The mother begins to keep a notebook of these incidents, her handwriting small and precise, as if shrinking from the page might keep the chaos contained. Outside, the world remains wholesome and bright. Neighbors wave from driveways, unaware that the family's smiles are becoming rehearsed. Sunday church services continue, the children lined up like choir notes. But the older boys stare past the pulpit, eyes glassy, as if tuning to a frequency no one else can hear. By early spring, the whispers grow bolder. Donald complains of a presence watching him from the corners of every room. He begins to speak in riddles, describing patterns in the air and machines behind the sky. When his mother presses a cool palm to his forehead, he jerks away, shouting that her touch burns. Matthew's behavior follows a parallel track. He spends long stretches motionless, head tilted, listening to something inaudible. Then, without warning, he erupts in sudden laughter, high, sharp, and utterly joyless. The younger siblings scatter like startled birds. The parents, still desperate for normalcy, consult the family doctor. He offers bromides about adolescent stress and suggests vitamins. Psychiatry in mid-century America remains a field of crude guesses. Words like schizophrenia are whispered rather than diagnosed. The father accepts the doctor's platitudes with stiff courtesy, but inside he feels the first cold draft of fear. The house itself seems to respond. Floorboards groan when no one walks. The furnace clicks in irregular rhythms like a heartbeat out of time. Even daylight feels altered, longer shadows, colors muted as if dusted with ash. The mother catches herself pausing in doorways, listening for sounds she both dreads and expects. One evening, during a rare family movie night, the reel-to-reel projector sputters and dies. In the sudden dark, Donald begins to chant under his breath. Words tumble out, half scripture, half cipher. The other children sit frozen, the flicker of the cooling bulb casting fractured light across their faces. Their father's command to stop this nonsense breaks like glass in the room. But Donald does not stop until the chant dissolves into a single, low moan. By the time summer edges near, the parents can no longer deny the pattern. Something is taking root in their eldest sons. Something that discipline and vitamins cannot touch. Friends notice the boys' distant gazes, the way their conversations fray into silence. The mother's notebook now holds pages of incidents, a chronicle of unease she reads and rereads each night, yet she still folds laundry with methodical grace. She still sets the table for 14 and offers cheerful greetings to the neighbors. The performance must continue, if only to keep the encroaching chaos from consuming them whole. The whispers in the walls never stop. Some nights they sound like laughter, other nights like weeping. Whether the voices belong to the house or to the minds within it, no one can say. What is certain is this: the storm that began as a faint murmur is gathering strength, and the first undeniable rupture is near. The storm arrives on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. It is late August, the air heavy with the metallic scent that precedes rain. Inside the brown brick house, ceiling fans turn lazily, their soft whir a lullaby over the clatter of 12 restless children. The mother is folding laundry when the first scream rips through the hallway, raw, animal, and unmistakably human. Donald, the eldest, bursts from his bedroom. Eyes wide and glassy, pupils blown like ink drops in milk. His chest heaves as if he has outrun a predator, only he can see. He shouts a string of words that do not belong together. Numbers, fragments of scripture, half-formed equations. His hands slash the air, clawing at invisible threads. The family freezes. Chairs scrape the floor as brothers and sisters retreat to the corners of the living room. The mother drops a folded shirt, the fabric landing with a muffled thud that sounds too loud. She steps forward, voice trembling, calling her son's name. Donald jerks as though struck. "Don't you see them?" he demands. "They're in the walls, machines, watching." His gaze skitters from ceiling to window to floor. Never landing, never still. The father arrives from the backyard, his face stern with the confidence of a man who believes order can be willed into existence. He grips Donald's shoulders and speaks in the slow cadence he uses with frightened animals. "Son, breathe. You're safe." Donald's body stiffens, then convulses in a violent shrug that sends his father staggering. He breaks free and slams his fists against the wall. Plaster cracks. "They told me," he cries. "The patterns. Stop the patterns. Stop the numbers." His voice pitches higher until it splinters into a howl. The younger children scatter like startled birds, some sobbing, others silent with shock. The mother tries to gather them, but her own hands shake. She catches sight of Matthew, second oldest, standing motionless in the doorway. His eyes wide, not with fear, but with recognition, as if he too hears something the rest cannot. Neighbors later recall a single, chilling moment when the howl carried beyond the house, rising above the rhythmic hiss of the coming rain. One woman across the street paused mid-sentence on the phone, convinced she'd heard an animal in pain. Inside, the father wrestles Donald toward the sofa. The boy's strength is startling, more than teenage muscle should allow. Sweat darkens his shirt. Spittle flecks his lips as he mutters in broken syllables. The words have no grammar, yet they carry a strange rhythm, like a chant dredged from some forgotten language. The mother calls the family doctor. Her voice, usually clear and commanding, trembles as she describes an episode, a fit, something terrible. The doctor, polite but cautious, advises a sedative and promises to visit in the morning. Likely stress, he offers. Young men sometimes buckle under pressure. But stress does not explain the sudden shift when Donald stops struggling and goes rigid, staring at the ceiling as if transfixed by a silent command. "They're choosing," he whispers. "We're marked." Rain begins to fall, tapping the windows in a steady rhythm. Thunder rolls across the hills, low and unhurried. The house smells of ozone and fear. For the next hours, Donald drifts between agitation and eerie calm. At times he rocks and mutters. At others he sits perfectly still, eyes fixed on some distant horizon no one else can see. The younger children huddle in their rooms, whispering questions their parents cannot answer. When the doctor finally arrives the next morning, Donald is slumped in a chair, exhausted but awake. His voice is hoarse. He claims he remembers nothing beyond bright lines and a great noise inside the earth. The doctor listens, brows knit, then prescribes rest and a mild tranquilizer. "Adolescent nervous breakdown," he says, as though naming it might tame it. Yet the air in the house has changed. Every creak of the floorboard sounds like a warning. The mother feels it in the pit of her stomach. Something irreversible has begun. She records the night's events in her notebook, the pages already thick with strange occurrences. This entry is different, longer, darker, a confession of helplessness she cannot voice aloud. Donald returns to school a week later, but the fracture is visible. Teachers note his vacant stares, the sudden bursts of cryptic speech. Classmates avoid him. At home he withdraws, spending hours behind a locked door humming to himself. The memory of that night lingers like a bruise on the family's collective mind. And Matthew, the quiet watcher, begins to change too. He flinches at invisible sounds, eyes darting as though mapping a secret geometry. The mother sees the signs and feels the cold recognition of a pattern. The first break is never just one night. It is a threshold, a point of no return. The family has crossed it. Outside, the suburb resumes its rhythms. Lawns mowed, milk bottles delivered, church bells ringing on Sunday. But within the brown brick house, the walls feel closer, the air denser. As if the house itself knows the truth, madness has chosen its opening, and it will not stop with one son. The house never truly recovered from Donald's first break. What seemed like an isolated storm soon revealed itself as the opening move in a pattern that would define and ultimately consume the family. Autumn arrives cold and bright. The neighborhood smells of wood smoke and damp leaves, a comfort to everyone except those living behind the brown brick facade. Inside, the mother counts small oddities like beads on a rosary. Spoons left balanced in door frames. Radios switched on, though no one admits to touching them. The persistent rustle of whispers that seem to ride the furnace ducts. She keeps her notebook close, its pages filling with a script of dread. Donald, though medicated, drifts through days like a ghost. He speaks less but watches more, eyes glittering with a private meaning. Sometimes, in sudden clarity, he warns his siblings not to follow the numbers or let the machines choose them. His words cling to the younger children, who repeat them in playground chants they do not understand. Then Matthew begins to unravel. It starts with sleeplessness. He paces the upstairs hallway deep into the night, the boards creaking in a rhythm the mother begins to recognize. 3 slow steps, pause, 3 slow steps, pause. When questioned, he claims he is listening for signals. Soon he stops eating with the family, insisting the food is marked. He lines his bedroom wall with tattered notebook paper, covered in intersecting circles, maps of a world no one else can see. The father responds with discipline, stricter rules, earlier curfews, sharp words meant to snap Matthew back to reason. But reason is already slipping. One evening, Matthew bursts from his room shouting that the ceiling is bleeding light. His siblings watch in stunned silence as he collapses to the floor, arms shielding his head from an invisible blaze. The family doctor suggests stronger sedatives, speaking in the careful tones of a man who knows he is out of his depth. Psychiatry in the 1950s offers little more than vague labels, nervous illness, latent psychosis, and even less hope. Winter tightens its grip. The house grows colder despite the furnace's constant rumble. The mother begins to believe the walls themselves carry a charge, as if static electricity has infused the air. Her notebook entries become frantic, the once neat script slanting toward panic. By early January, a third brother, Peter, shows signs that are impossible to dismiss. He is only 16, all elbows and awkward limbs, but he speaks with a sudden, eerie authority. He claims the government has hidden microphones in the telephone wires, that the neighbor's dog is a spy. When challenged, he erupts in laughter so jagged it cuts through the house like shattered glass. 3 sons, 3 variations of the same unnameable illness. The younger children start to avoid the upper floor altogether. They gather in the kitchen at night, whispering as the sounds of pacing echo from above. Some sleep with pillows over their ears. Others learn to dream with one eye open. The father, still clinging to the idea of control, takes to long evening walks, his breath visible in the frigid air. He prays silently, pleading for strength, bargaining with a God who remains infuriatingly quiet. The mother withdraws inward. She moves through her days like a figure in a slow-motion film, washing clothes, chopping vegetables, tucking children into bed while dread coils tighter around her heart. Each time a child hesitates before answering a question, she wonders if the pattern has claimed another. And it does. By spring, the 4th son, Brian, begins to complain of voices. At first they are whispers, gentle suggestions, but soon they grow insistent, commanding him to stay awake, to keep watch. He speaks of them with the same haunted certainty that now unites his older brothers. The mother's notebook is a litany of dates and symptoms. Donald, visions. August 27th, Matthew, sleeplessness. October 5th, Peter, paranoia. December 19th, Brian, voices. March 3rd, The ink darkens as the list lengthens. Outside, the neighbors notice only fragments. A boy staring too long at nothing. Another mumbling to himself at the bus stop. They whisper about the family's bad luck. But the facade of normalcy, church on Sundays, polite greetings at the mailbox, holds just enough to keep curiosity at bay. By the time the fifth and sixth sons begin to show signs, one withdrawing into near catatonia, the other erupting in sudden, unexplained rages, the house feels less like a home and more like a laboratory of suffering. 6 brothers, each caught in the same invisible snare. The younger siblings, those not yet touched, carry the heaviest silence. They tiptoe through corridors, wondering which of them will be next. Every cough of the furnace, every flicker of the light bulb, feels like an omen. Scientists will later marvel at the statistical improbability. 6 cases of schizophrenia within one family, a concentration so dense it would reshape psychiatric genetics. But in these years there is no marvel, only grief and confusion. The parents, once pillars of small-town steadiness, now move like shadows of themselves. The father's shoulders stoop under the weight of a war he cannot fight. The mother prays for mercy she cannot name. Spring sunlight finally breaks through the long winter, but the house remains cloaked in its own storm. Doors stay locked, curtains drawn. The quiet suburban street hums with the promise of new life, yet behind the brick walls an old, relentless inheritance tightens its grip. The chain is complete, and it has only begun to reveal the cost. The decision to seek outside help does not come with a single moment of clarity. It seeps in slow and reluctant like water through a cracked foundation. By the early 1960s, the parents can no longer pretend their household is merely unlucky. 6 sons have drifted or plunged into madness, and the weight of their care is crushing the family from the inside. Hospitals loom as a last resort. Not the clean, modern facilities of glossy brochures, but the hulking grey institutions that sit on the edges of towns, where wind whistles through iron gates and windows are set high enough to keep desperate hands from reaching the glass. To admit a child here is to surrender him to an era when psychiatry is more guesswork than science. Donald is the first. A heavy door swings shut behind him with a metallic finality that the mother will hear in dreams for years. Inside, fluorescent lights buzz like captive insects. Nurses move briskly, their white shoes squeaking on linoleum floors. He is given a narrow bed, a wool blanket, and a schedule of treatments that sound clinical but feel medieval. Ice baths for agitation, electroconvulsive therapy for resetting the brain, sedatives strong enough to blur the edges of the world. The parents sign consent forms with shaking hands. The doctor speaks of chemical imbalances and promising new drugs, but his eyes betray caution. No one knows how or if Donald will return. Weeks stretch into months. The boy who once scrawled strange equations in the attic now sits in a common room, staring at walls painted the color of damp chalk. He speaks rarely, his voice a whisper that seems borrowed from someone else. Matthew follows not long after. His descent is swifter, a slide rather than a stumble. One night he vanishes from his room, found hours later wandering the highway in his pajamas, convinced that headlights are divine messengers. He too is taken behind locked doors. The pattern repeats until half the brothers have spent time in state institutions. Each admission feels like a quiet funeral, the family driving home through fields of winter stubble, the car a coffin of unspoken grief. Outside the hospital walls, treatments evolve little. Thorazine, the new miracle drug, flattens personalities into mute compliance. Electroshock remains routine. Therapy, when offered, is perfunctory, sessions measured by the efficiency of restraint rather than understanding. The stigma is almost as brutal as the illness. Neighbors who once exchanged recipes now avert their eyes. Children who once played baseball with the brothers cross the street to avoid them. Whispers travel faster than facts. Bad blood, cursed family, punishment from God. The mother overhears fragments at the grocery store and pretends not to notice, but each syllable lands like a stone. At home, the remaining siblings live in a state of suspended dread. Every knock on the door could be another summons from the hospital. They speak in hushed tones, careful not to mention the locked wards where their brothers pace sterile hallways. The house that once rang with laughter is now a place of cautious footsteps and muffled sobs. Visiting days are a study in heartbreak. Families sit on hard plastic chairs while orderlies watch from the corners. Donald sometimes greets his parents with a thin smile, sometimes with a vacant stare that feels worse than anger. Matthew oscillates between gentle lucidity and sudden explosive rants about hidden transmitters in the ceiling. The mother brings home cooked meals that go untouched. She leaves each visit carrying the weight of a love she can no longer express in any language her sons understand. The father, once a pillar of discipline, begins to fracture in quieter ways. He spends long hours in the garage, polishing tools that need no polishing. The smell of machine oil thick in the air. Neighbors notice his stooped shoulders, the distant look that settles over his face like evening fog. Behind the locked doors, the brothers become both patients and specimens. Doctors scribble notes debating whether this family represents a rare genetic cluster or a tragic coincidence. Blood is drawn, tests are run, and the boy's suffering becomes data, numbers to be plotted on charts that will outlive them. And yet, amid the sterile procedures, flickers of humanity remain. A nurse hums a lullaby while adjusting a blanket. An orderly sneaks extra cookies to a boy who has not smiled in weeks. Tiny gestures of kindness pierce the institutional gloom, reminders that these young men are more than case studies. But the family knows the truth. Once a door like this closes, it never truly opens again. Even when a son is released, he carries the hospital within him. The shock treatments, the sedatives, the memory of a world reduced to schedules and restraints. The younger siblings watch and learn. Some vow never to show weakness, fearing the same fate. Others retreat into silence, convinced that their own minds harbor ticking bombs. The mother senses it all. The quiet despair, the unspoken question of who will be next. Outside, the suburban street remains deceptively ordinary. Lawns trimmed, mail delivered, the scent of lilacs in spring. But within the family, life is divided into two realities. The home and the hospital, the free and the locked away. The era offers no better answers. Schizophrenia is still a riddle, its cause a fog of theories. Bad parenting, chemical imbalance, supernatural curse. None of them ease the nightly ache that settles in the mother's chest as she writes another entry in her notebook, chronicling the slow-motion shattering of her sons. Behind those institutional doors, the family's tragedy is being documented, measured, and unknowingly prepared for a future in which scientists will call their suffering a breakthrough. For years, the family's pain was private, contained within hospital walls and a suburban home that grew quieter with every admission. But word travels in medical circles like heat through dry grass. By the late 1960s, a whisper has become a rumor. There's a family in Colorado where schizophrenia blooms like a dark orchard. The first visitors come discreetly. Two men in dark wool coats appear at the state hospital, flashing university badges that carry the scent of authority. They introduce themselves as researchers from the National Institute of Mental Health. Their language is careful, almost reverent, as if approaching a sacred site. They have heard of the brothers, 6 sons afflicted, a statistical impossibility, and they want to learn more, to help, to understand the roots of this cruel disease. The hospital staff, weary from years of revolving door admissions, welcomes them. A breakthrough would be good publicity. The parents, desperate for anything that might save their children or at least explain their suffering, agree to a meeting. It takes place in a cramped conference room smelling of coffee grounds and disinfectant. Charts are spread across a long table. The lead researcher, a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses, speaks with a confidence that feels almost hypnotic. He describes a future where science will untangle the mysteries of the human mind, where children like theirs will not be locked away but treated, perhaps even cured before symptoms ever appear. The mother listens, hope flickering like a candle in a draught. The father keeps his arms crossed, suspicious of easy promises. But the researchers are persuasive. They talk of genetics, of patterns hidden in bloodlines, of the possibility that this single family could help the world. They request permission to collect samples, blood, saliva, even hair, along with exhaustive medical histories. What they don't say, at least not directly, is that the family represents something more valuable than compassion. They are a once-in-a-generation opportunity. 6 confirmed cases of schizophrenia among 12 siblings, all sharing the same parents. To geneticists, it is as if lightning has struck in the same place 6 times. Soon the visits become routine. Clipboards replace casseroles. Doctors and graduate students arrive in clusters, their eyes sharp with curiosity. They move through the house like cartographers of the invisible, mapping DNA before the term is widely known. They record the cadence of each voice, the slope of each forehead, the tiniest tremor of a hand reaching for a glass of water. For the affected brothers, the attention is disorienting. Some sit silently, wary of strangers who ask endless questions about their dreams and delusions. Others revel in the sudden importance, sensing that their fractured minds have become the center of an unfolding mystery. Blood draws and cognitive tests become part of their new routine, as familiar as the evening medication rounds. The unaffected siblings feel a different pressure. They are asked for samples too, their supposed normalcy just as vital to the research. Each vial of blood carries a silent accusation. Will you be next? They give what is asked, but at night they stare at their hands, wondering what secrets flow in their veins. The researchers keep their distance emotionally, but even they cannot escape the eerie gravity of the household. They hear the sudden laughter from empty rooms, the abrupt rages that shake the walls. One graduate student writes in her field notes, "It is like walking through a living laboratory of heredity and fate." Ethical questions linger, unspoken. Consent forms are signed. But how much can a family, worn down by illness and stigma, truly understand about the decades of experiments that will follow? The scientists press forward, convinced that knowledge outweighs ambiguity. They collect not just blood but stories, childhood memories, family legends, photographs of grandparents long dead, building a genetic family tree that reaches backward through time. As months turn to years, the family becomes less a collection of individuals and more a phenomenon. Medical journals reference them obliquely, a large Midwestern family with multiple incidences of schizophrenia. Funding proposals cite them as evidence that genetics, not parenting alone, drives the disease. In lecture halls across the country, professors speak of an extraordinary pedigree, their voices tinged with awe. The mother clings to the hope that this intrusion will lead to a cure. She imagines a day when the locked doors will open and her sons will walk free, their minds restored. The father remains skeptical, his silence a quiet shield. He senses that the researcher's devotion is less about healing and more about discovery. That the family's suffering is being transmuted into data points on someone else's career ladder. Meanwhile, the afflicted brothers continue their unpredictable orbits, sometimes lucid, sometimes lost in private galaxies of paranoia and grandiose visions. The researchers document every episode, every medication change, every small shift in behavior. They are mapping madness, but they are also mapping the family itself, turning tragedy into a living archive. The siblings who remain healthy wrestle with conflicting emotions. Pride that their family might change science forever. Fear that their own minds might one day betray them. Resentment that their pain has become public property, examined by strangers who will never fully grasp the weight of a dinner table where half the seats are empty. And yet, the work continues. Blood samples are stored in frosted freezers. Notes are typed and filed. What began as hushed visits has become a long-term partnership between the family and a growing network of genetic researchers. They will follow this family for decades, through triumphs and funerals, chasing an answer to the riddle of schizophrenia. In quiet moments, the mother wonders whether they have made a Faustian bargain, trading privacy and dignity for the faint hope of redemption. But each time she looks into the vacant eyes of a son who no longer recognizes her, she whispers the same fragile prayer, "Let something good come of this." The researchers pack their instruments after another long day, their footsteps echoing in the hallway. Outside, night settles over the neighborhood. Behind them, the family remains, half patients, half pioneers, unaware that their very blood will one day rewrite the textbooks of psychiatry. By the early 1970s, the family's tragedy has become more than a case study. It is a scientific obsession. Deep inside refrigerated vaults at the National Institute of Mental Health, dozens of their blood vials gleam under fluorescent light. Each tube is a frozen telegram from the human genome, a message researchers are desperate to decode. In conference rooms across the country, psychiatrists and geneticists speak of the family in near-mythic terms. They call it the Colorado pedigree, careful to omit the surname but never the wonder. 6 brothers with schizophrenia, 6 unaffected siblings, 2 unwavering parents, the perfect natural experiment. It's like finding a Rosetta Stone for mental illness. One scientist proclaims at a Boston symposium, his voice vibrating with excitement. A genetic jackpot, grants multiply. Laboratories that once struggled for funding now receive blank checks to probe the mystery. Every researcher wants a piece of the puzzle. Cytogeneticists with their microscopes, biochemists with their enzymes, psychiatrists with their questionnaires. What began as quiet home visits has become a multinational effort, a race to isolate the elusive schizophrenia gene. The technology of the era is crude by today's standards, yet groundbreaking for its time. Scientists stain chromosomes with fluorescent dyes, searching for faint irregularities. They chart family trees on enormous rolls of paper, black circles and squares connected by delicate lines, as if mapping a haunted forest. They sequence fragments of DNA with painstaking slowness, each base pair a tiny revelation. For the unaffected siblings, the attention is relentless. Every year brings more tests, spinal taps, cognitive batteries, psychiatric interviews that peel their memories bare. They comply, half flattered and half terrified, knowing that every drop of blood could betray a hidden defect. At night, some lie awake counting the odds, wondering if a single rogue gene is waiting to bloom. The afflicted brothers drift between lucidity and chaos. Some welcome the researchers as visitors from a world they barely remember. Others regard them as conspirators in a vast government plot. Consent is a slippery concept. On paper, signatures exist. In reality, comprehension varies from day to day, from hour to hour. Yet the data flows steadily into federal archives. Ethicists raise quiet alarms. Should so much of one family's life, bloodlines, hospital records, genetic material, become public property? The question is drowned out by the promise of discovery. Schizophrenia has long mocked psychiatry with its complexity. If one extraordinary family can unlock its code, the reasoning goes, the sacrifice is worth it. By the late 80s, technology catches up to ambition. The first human gene maps appear, and the Colorado samples take center stage. Teams in Maryland and Boston announce they have identified a hotspot on chromosome 22, a region that may harbor the vulnerability to schizophrenia. Headlines trumpet a coming cure. Pharmaceutical companies quietly adjust their research budgets. For a moment, the family's suffering seems poised to change the fate of millions. But the science proves less simple than the headlines. The so-called schizophrenia gene splinters into a constellation of possibilities, dozens of loci, each contributing a sliver of risk. The disorder is not a single mutation but a storm of them, a tangled interplay of heredity and environment. Still, the Colorado pedigree remains the gold standard. Its samples are requested again and again as new techniques, polymerase chain reaction, whole genome sequencing, arrive to pry deeper into the code. Meanwhile, the family ages. The parents grow frail, their once private sorrow now a permanent entry in medical literature. Some brothers remain institutionalized, their days measured in medication schedules and supervised walks. Others pass away, their DNA stored in perpetuity, their lives reduced to case numbers. The unaffected siblings build cautious lives, marriages shadowed by genetic uncertainty, children born beneath the question mark of inheritance. Yet the research marches forward. In 2004, a landmark study draws directly on the family's decades of samples to confirm that schizophrenia is roughly 80% heritable. A later international consortium, pooling data from more than 30,000 subjects, cites the Colorado lineage as a foundation stone for genome-wide association studies. Every breakthrough carries the faint echo of their sacrifice. The scientists themselves remain awed. In lectures, they speak of the extraordinary generosity of the family, but behind the admiration lies a colder truth. The Galvin bloodline is a once-in-a-lifetime resource. Even as bioethicists debate ownership of genetic material, research teams quietly schedule fresh analyses, confident the samples will outlive their donors. For the surviving siblings, the legacy is ambivalent. Some feel pride that their family's suffering might ease the burden for future generations. Others feel used, their privacy eroded beyond recall. "We were a gold mine," one sister will say decades later, but no one asked how it felt to be mined. Still, the data endures. In freezers chilled to -80 degrees, vials of blood and extracted DNA remain perfectly preserved, like seeds awaiting a future harvest. Graduate students who were not yet born when the first samples were drawn now pipette the same genetic material, chasing answers their predecessors only imagined. The family name is known today to every serious researcher of psychiatric genetics. Papers continue to cite their contribution in footnotes and acknowledgements, a quiet testament to how tragedy can be transformed into knowledge. The mother's wish that some good might come of their pain has been granted, though not in any way she could have envisioned. Outside the sterile laboratories, life goes on. New antipsychotic drugs emerge, offering relief but not cure. Genome editing techniques, such as CRISPR, hint at possibilities once unthinkable. Targeted interventions before symptoms ever begin. Each of these advances traces a faint line back to the Colorado house, where whispers first filled the walls. Their story proves that human suffering can illuminate the darkest corners of biology. But it also forces an unsettling question. When science turns a family into a resource, where does humanity end and research begin? The answer lies suspended like the DNA itself, in a frost-lined vial, waiting for the next generation of scientists to thaw it, and perhaps to reckon with the price that was paid. For decades, the research spotlight had fixed itself on the brothers who unraveled. But just outside that circle of scrutiny lived the rest of the family, the so-called controls, the siblings whose sanity made them scientifically valuable and personally invisible. To the world, they were proof that not every branch of this bloodline bent toward madness. To themselves, they were a silent cohort carrying an unshakable question: why not me? Growing up, they learned early to keep their fears private. While reporters and graduate students descended with clipboards and coolers, the well children set tables, did homework, and absorbed the tremors of a household under siege. They listened as doors locked behind brothers taken to hospitals, as their mother's voice thinned to a whisper on late-night phone calls. No one explained what schizophrenia was in language a child could grasp. The lesson came instead in echoes, arguments cut short, the rattle of pills in brown bottles, the sudden absence of a sibling at breakfast. Adulthood did not bring relief. Each healthy sibling carried a personal barometer for signs of unraveling. A sleepless night could trigger panic. Is this the first symptom? A fleeting mood swing became an omen. They scrutinized their own thoughts the way others check moles for cancer, searching for the faint shimmer of impending psychosis. Dating posed its own minefield. When a relationship grew serious, a choice loomed. Reveal the family history and watch potential partners retreat, or hide it and risk future betrayal. One sister recalls a fiancé's face tightening when she finally explained. Another brother, terrified of passing on the illness, chose permanent bachelorhood. The shadow of heredity lay across every romantic possibility, a silent third party in every conversation about children. And then, there was survivor's guilt. Thanksgiving dinners with empty chairs became yearly reminders that the genetic dice had spared some and condemned others. They watched their brothers cycle through wards and medications, each relapse another scene in a tragedy they could not stop. The healthy siblings visited dutifully, bringing small comforts, homemade cookies, clean socks, while wondering if their mere presence was a cruel contrast, proof of what their ill brothers might have been. The researchers, unintentionally, deepened these wounds. To science, the unaffected were as valuable as the afflicted. Every year brought fresh rounds of tests, blood draws, psychological inventories, memory exercises performed under fluorescent lights. They were measured not for who they were, but for what they were not. Their normalcy became a commodity, their privacy a footnote in grant proposals. Some tried to rebel. One sister moved across the country and changed her last name, hoping anonymity might break the chain. Yet letters from research teams still arrived, each one a polite reminder that she remained part of the pedigree, her DNA forever archived. Another sibling immersed herself in advocacy, turning pain into purpose. But even that carried a paradox. Every speech about mental health awareness tethered her back to the family story she longed to escape. Their parents, aging and exhausted, understood the cost but rarely spoke of it. The mother, once meticulous with her incident notebook, began to apologize to the well children in small, sidelong ways, a second helping of dessert, a hand squeezed a little longer. She sensed the burden they bore. Not just the fear of illness, but the duty of being the proof that sanity still ran in the blood. Friendships outside the family were complicated. How do you explain a childhood of midnight hospital runs and whispered diagnoses? Some siblings chose silence, presenting curated versions of their past. Others confided in close friends only to be met with curiosity that felt invasive, as though their family were a sideshow for someone else's fascination with madness. Even success could taste bitter. One sister built a thriving career in education, yet each promotion carried a stab of guilt. Her twin brother spent those same years in a locked ward, sketching incomprehensible maps on scrap paper. She once admitted in a journal, "I lived two lives, mine and the one he lost. Therapy helped, but only so far." Counselors could offer coping strategies, not certainty. The fundamental riddle remained unsolved. Why 6 and not all 12? Modern genetics would later reveal that risk is probabilistic, a storm of many small genes rather than a single fatal mutation. But probability offers little comfort when every thought is an act of vigilance. Despite the private anguish, bonds among the surviving siblings deepened. They became each other's quiet lifeline, a network of late-night phone calls and unspoken understanding. When weddings happened, they celebrated fiercely, aware that joy in their family was precious and rare. When funerals came, too many too soon, they stood shoulder to shoulder, silent in the knowledge that any one of them might have occupied the coffin. By the 21st century, many of the original researchers had retired, but the data lived on. New graduate students requested fresh samples from the same freezer vials drawn decades earlier. The siblings sometimes joked darkly that they were immortal in a lab, their blood still young while their bodies aged. It was a strange kind of permanence, both flattering and imprisoning. What none of them could escape was the dual legacy. They were at once survivors and specimens. Their lives illuminated the capriciousness of genetics, but they also revealed something science cannot quantify: the human cost of being the control group in a lifelong experiment. In their quiet perseverance lay another kind of research finding: resilience, unmeasured but undeniable. They rarely sought recognition. When journalists called, most declined interviews, unwilling to turn private endurance into public spectacle. Their story had already been told too many times, always with the same headline about a family of 6 schizophrenic brothers. The unaffected siblings knew they were more than a footnote, yet they also knew the world preferred its tragedies simple. In the end, their greatest act of defiance was simply to keep living ordinary lives, raising children, building careers, aging with dignity. Each normal day became a quiet rebuke to the chaos that had defined their childhood. It was not heroism in the cinematic sense, but something steadier: survival without surrender. The brothers are older now, those who remain. Their hair has thinned, their voices softened, but their DNA is still young inside the frosted freezers of half a dozen universities. For scientists of the 21st century, the Galvin samples are not a relic. They are a living text, read and reread as technology sharpens its focus. What began as fluorescent-stained chromosomes has become full genome sequencing, an ability to read 3 billion chemical letters like a novel. Every few years, another research team unseals a tiny vial drawn half a century earlier, drops of blood preserved against time. Graduate students who were not yet born when the first samples were taken now load those molecules into sleek black machines, tracing patterns that their predecessors could only guess at. The results have been startling. The family's DNA helped confirm what psychiatry long suspected but could not prove. Schizophrenia is not a single mutation, but a complex network of hundreds of genes, each exerting a small gravitational pull. Modern studies cite their contribution in nearly every major paper on the disorder's heritability. The Colorado pedigree, once whispered about in conference corridors, is now a cornerstone of psychiatric genetics. In 2014, an international consortium announced the discovery of more than 100 gene variants associated with schizophrenia. Buried in the acknowledgements of the landmark Nature paper is a familiar phrase: samples provided by the Galvin family cohort. The wording is clinical, but inside laboratories across the world, researchers understand what it means. The Colorado bloodline made this possible. New therapies traced the same line of descent. Second-generation antipsychotics, safer, more precise, owe their design to genetic clues first glimpsed in the family's chromosomes. Predictive testing for high-risk youth, now common in major psychiatric centers, rests on statistical models refined with Galvin DNA. Even the bold frontier of CRISPR gene editing, still experimental for mental illness, draws from the catalogue of mutations first compiled from those long-ago blood draws. Yet every breakthrough carries an echo of unease. Ethicists ask whether consent given decades earlier, under the fog of grief and stigma, can truly cover today's uses. Global databases, artificial intelligence algorithms, patents worth millions. Can a family's suffering be owned? And if so, by whom? The scientists who isolated the genes, the universities that stored the samples, or the descendants whose blood still fuels discovery? The surviving siblings wrestle with these questions in private. Some feel pride that their sacrifice has illuminated the darkest corridors of the human mind. Others see only exploitation, a life story reduced to a footnote, a perpetual case study. They call it a legacy, one sister once said, but it feels more like a permanent exposure. We can never step out of the experiment. Meanwhile, the public narrative simplifies what was never simple. Magazine profiles celebrate a family that changed science, framing their tragedy as destiny. Television specials lean on familiar tropes: the haunted house, the brilliant but cursed bloodline. Rarely do they show the long years of hospital visits, the quiet endurance of siblings who built ordinary lives under extraordinary scrutiny. Inside the labs, reverence mingles with ambition. Researchers speak of the family in almost mythical terms. One veteran geneticist keeps a photograph of the old Colorado house pinned above his desk. A reminder, he says, that every data set begins with someone's heartbreak. Younger scientists, raised in the age of instant sequencing, treat the samples with near religious care. They know they are handling a resource that can never be replaced. The mother's wish that something good might rise from all that sorrow has been fulfilled in ways she could not have imagined. Schizophrenia is still a formidable riddle, but treatment is more humane, diagnoses more accurate, and stigma slowly eroding. Every small victory in clinics around the world carries a trace of the family's DNA. Yet the moral ledger remains unsettled. Did the researchers give enough in return? Did the journals and universities, the pharmaceutical companies and grant agencies truly honor the cost? There are no clear answers, only the quiet persistence of science moving forward, step by step, on the path first cleared by this singular lineage. Today, as evening settles over the Rockies, the original house still stands, its bricks weathered but intact. Few passers-by know the history within those walls. The nights of whispered delusion, the mornings when a brother disappeared behind locked doors, the long procession of scientists carrying coolers of blood. But in laboratories from Maryland to Munich, their presence is everywhere. In spreadsheets of gene variants, In training slides for young psychiatrists, in the algorithms predicting risk for children not yet born, this is their legacy. Not a monument of stone, but a living map of human vulnerability. The Galvin DNA has become part of the world's medical memory, an enduring guide to the mysteries of mind and inheritance. It is a triumph of knowledge born from a family's quiet devastation. And still, questions linger like a low hum beneath the triumph. How much of a person can be captured in code? What do we owe the families who give science their most intimate inheritance? The answers may never be complete, but the research continues, each discovery a testament to lives both celebrated and sacrificed. The mountains keep their secrets well. From the highway, the old Galvin house is just another weather-worn home on a quiet Colorado road. Pine needles gathering in the gutters, a porch light that flickers when the wind rises. Visitors drive past without a second glance. Yet for those who know the story, the air seems to vibrate with memory. Every timber, every nail feels saturated with the echoes of a family that once lived here. A family whose pain changed the science of the mind. Decades have passed since the worst nights, since doors splintered under fists and patrol cars idled in the driveway. Some of the brothers have died, others live on in treatment facilities or small apartments where the walls are bare and the curtains drawn. The sisters, now older than their mother ever was, keep photographs in boxes they rarely open. Time has softened the details, but not the weight. What remains most vividly is the sound. The sudden outburst of a voice that is no longer tethered to reality. The low chant of a man pacing the hallway, the midnight shattering of glass. Neighbors swore they could hear it even when the windows were closed, a kind of resonance that carried across the dark yard like a warning. Today, when the wind whistles through broken eaves, you might imagine it still. Science tells a different story. In university labs across the world, the Galvin name appears in academic citations and genome databases. Their blood, once drawn in hushed hospital rooms, circulates as digital code. For researchers, the family is a landmark, a proof that madness can be charted, mapped, even predicted. But the people who lived inside that landmark know that charts cannot capture everything. A genome can reveal risk. It cannot record the terror of a child waking to a brother's scream, or the way silence can grow so heavy it feels alive. The paradox is cruel. The more precisely the disorder is explained, the more the family seems to vanish inside the explanation. Journalists call them the first family of schizophrenia, a phrase that sounds almost regal, as if tragedy were an inheritance of honor. Yet the surviving siblings know the title erases the daily grind of fear and caretaking, the small acts of endurance that never make headlines. Late in life, one sister agreed to a single interview. She spoke softly, almost whispering. "People think we're ghosts in a lab report," she said. "We're not. We still wake up every day. We still wonder who we might have been." Outside their story, the world spins on. New medications offer hope to patients who once faced only institutional walls. Genetic counseling gives young parents tools to anticipate risk. Hospitals speak openly of mental illness, a vocabulary of empathy slowly replacing stigma. These are victories forged in part from Galvin suffering. Yet progress does not silence the darker questions. If science can now identify the vulnerable before symptoms appear, what will society do with that knowledge? Who decides whether a life defined by possibility is worth living? The echoes of madness are not confined to one bloodline. They ripple outward, through hospital wards where a nurse holds the trembling hand of a new patient, through university classrooms where students debate nature and nurture, through every family that waits in dread for a diagnosis. The Galvins were not chosen by fate so much as revealed by it. A single visible flare in a night sky crowded with invisible fires. Walk the property today and you'll see ordinary things. A leaning fence, a tire half buried in weeds, the skeletal remains of a treehouse. But if you pause, if you let the silence stretch, the past begins to breathe. Not in ghosts or rattling chains, but in the faint recognition that what happened here is never entirely over. Illness this profound does not simply disappear. It lingers in the genes of descendants, in the minds of scientists, in the cautionary tales parents tell their children. This is the final irony. The family once feared that madness would define them forever. In a sense it has, but not as a curse whispered behind closed doors. Instead it endures as knowledge, as data, as the foundation for treatments that will spare others the same fate. Their pain has become a tool for mercy. As evening falls, the sky over the Rockies burns with copper light. From a distance, the house is just a silhouette, a dark shape against the horizon. No screams, no broken glass, only wind moving through pine needles, carrying a memory that is neither fully past nor fully present. The world will remember the Galvins as subjects of science, as a family both extraordinary and heartbreakingly ordinary. But those who listen closely will hear something else beneath the research papers and documentaries, a faint, persistent sound, like a voice just beyond comprehension. It is the echo of madness. Not a threat, not a prophecy, a reminder that the mind is fragile, that love endures even when reason fails, that every discovery carries the shadow of those who suffered for it. And as long as science seeks to understand the mysteries of the brain, the Galvins will never truly be silent. Their story travels in every centrifuge spin, every genome sequenced, every cautious hope that the darkness can, at last, be named.